I've always wanted to learn about Mesopotamia, so I'm watching this YouTube video. Go subscribe to this YouTube channel. He did way more work than I did, but we're going to watch this together. And yeah.
About 200 years ago, European archaeologists were busy digging through the sands of what's today the Middle East. Mostly confined to Egypt and the southern half of Mesopotamia, the land that today makes up the country we know as Iraq, they were searching for the remains of several places that had been featured in the Bible, the works of Greek...
Yo, it's kind of crazy to me how all of this such an important civilization existed where Iraq is today. That, like, it's such a desolate place now that it's just a horrifying place. I mean, at least from what I've heard. I'm perfectly fine to hear other opinions. But we're talking about one of the greatest civilizations in ancient history. Came from a place that now is in ruin.
Greek authors such as Herodotus and Strabo, and the journals of medieval and Renaissance travelers such as Benjamin of Tudela and Pietro della Valle. Babylon, Nineveh, Ur, names of places that many had heard or read about, but that few, if any in the West at the time, knew the precise locations of. By the early 1800s.
So, do you think that Mesopotamia is one of the oldest civilizations, or it's just the oldest civilization that we've found so far? Do you think that there are lost civilizations that existed? I know that, what's his name? Graham Stephan? Is that his name? Is that his name? The archaeologist who's been on like Joe Rogan and shit? No, Graham Stephan is the YouTuber, isn't he? He's like the finance guy. Who am I thinking of? Something Graham. What the fuck is his name? But do you think that there are like older, more lost civilizations? I'd like to hear some comments.
Archaeologists had made several important discoveries that culminated with Englishman Claudius James Rich mapping the ruins of Babylon and Nineveh, where, among other things, he collected numerous bricks, tablets, clay cylinders, and boundary stones that were inscribed with mysterious markings. However, they were not only present just in Babylon and Nineveh, but were found in many other places, including in Iran at sites such as Persepolis and Behistun. At these latter two sites, they were also accompanied by two other sets of similar but different markings, which scholars were now convinced were not decorations, but the scripts of unknown languages.
I have no idea how you decipher languages like that. I know that there's a Rosetta Stone that translates languages into other languages. It has like 3 different languages on it. But still, you have to learn to decipher one of them. How the fuck you even do that? I would like to hear comments on that as well.
After the decipherment of one of the 3 groups, which ended up being Old Persian, it became possible to decrypt the other 2. The script that was also present at the...
I see. So you knew it. If you already know Persian, then you can decrypt the other 2. Is that the Rosetta Stone right there?
Sites of Babylon and Nineveh was revealed to be Akkadian, though in those days, archaeologists called it Babylonian. The third of the trilingual inscriptions ended up being Elamite.
I've never heard of Elamite, and I've never heard of Akkadian.
Though no one today speaks it, Akkadian, like modern Hebrew and Arabic, is a Semitic language that is well understood by linguists and Near Eastern archaeologists alike. However, in the mid-19th century, a growing number of scholars began to suspect that this written form of Akkadian, which we call cuneiform, was not developed by the Semitic language speakers of Babylon and Assyria, but by another people.
So, when he says Semitic, do you think he means like Jewish? Like there were Jewish people back then, all the way back in Mesopotamia in 3500 BC?
Many of the Babylonian inscriptions and texts that were starting to be translated at the time contained the phrase Sumer and Akkad, as in land of Sumer and Akkad, or king of Sumer and Akkad. It's obvious that Sumer was a place, but where was it? And who were the inhabitants of Sumer, who they called Sumerians? Could this unconventional script have come from these, up until now, completely unknown people? Scholars were stuck in a conundrum. They didn't know it at the time, but those early archaeologists had stumbled upon what some call the mother civilization of both the Babylonians and the Assyrians.
So I looked up on YouTube Mesopotamia 3500 BC or so, because I'm trying to follow along a textbook, but I wanted video format. And Sumer and Sumerians, that's what came up. So I'm guessing the Sumerians are one of the most ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia.
We know these people today as the Sumerians. By around 7000 to 6000 BC, people began to move south along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to what were by then the fertile floodplains of Mesopotamia, specifically in the land that today makes up most of Iraq and parts of northern Syria.
So Mesopotamia, by the way, is simply a word that means between two rivers.
Mesopotamia, which means land between rivers, is the Greek name for the area, and it's here that early farms began to really take root on a much larger scale. The land of Mesopotamia is quite flat, and really consists of thousands of years of silt spread across the plain by the constant flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
What is silt? Is that like mud? Is it similar to mud? Because he's saying that it comes from floods. So I'm guessing it has something to do with floods. So mud?
This soil was, and is still today, extremely rich and fertile, making it ideal for growing crops such as wheat and barley. Small-scale farming had already been achieved several thousand years prior in parts of the Near East that we call the Fertile Crescent, which is a region of productive land that stretches north up the coast of the eastern Mediterranean, east through the mountains of Turkey and northern Iraq, before venturing south along the floodplains of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers towards the Persian Gulf.
Okay, so the Fertile Crescent isn't just Mesopotamia, it also includes Egypt and it extends to the Nile River. I did not know that. I thought it was just Mesopotamia.
One of these early farming communities that was widespread in central Mesopotamia was the Samara culture, named after the site of Samara where it was first discovered. Estimates vary, but most archaeologists date this culture to between 6500 to 5500 BC. Samaran pottery has its own distinctive style that's often decorated with geometric images representing natural phenomena. The early farmers of this culture seem to have dug irrigation canals to bring nearby rivers and streams under their control. Another culture that ended up being more widespread than the Samara is known as the Halaf culture. It was most active between the years 6500 to 5500 BC, though some date it to the later, more narrower span of time between 5700 to 5000 BC. Similar to the Samara, they also created very distinctive and beautiful ceramic objects and pottery that was widely traded throughout the Fertile Crescent. In return, the Halaf people generally received goods such as obsidian, bitumen, and seashells. They also created some of the earliest examples of stamp seals.
It's really weird to think about how, for most of human history, this would have been considered the beginning of time. We used to think, almost all humans used to think that the Earth hadn't been around for very long, comparative to what we think now, that it's been around for billions of years. People used to think that the Earth was only around for thousands of years, like 5,000 years. There's still people today who believe that. Specifically, what are they called? Creationists believe that. But yeah, it's weird to think about how people didn't know how old the Earth really is.
Not too long after 6000 BC, in southern Mesopotamia, changes began to take place that would ultimately set the stage for civilization as we know it. It more or less started with the people who belonged to what archaeologists call the Ubaid culture. We'll refer to the people of this culture as Ubaidians. They are of special interest to scholars because their civilization occupied the region immediately before the rise of the Sumerians and the creation of their first cities. The culture is named after Tel al-Ubaid, a site not too far from what would become the great Sumerian city of Ur, which also began as an Ubaidian settlement. Most scholars date the Ubaid culture to between 5500 to 4000 BC. The exact origins of the Ubaidians are unknown, but it's believed that they were likely migrants from other parts of the Fertile Crescent looking for new pastures for their flocks and virgin soil that could be cultivated for their crops. Most Ubaidian sites were small villages, though by the late 5th, early 4th millennium BC, some of these settlements are believed to have grown into towns of nearly 5,000 residents, where they grew wheat, barley, and lentils, in addition to raising livestock, including cattle, goats, and sheep.
Can't imagine that food tastes that good if you're just eating like lentils in a bowl. Like you don't got no... I guess if you got cattle, you can throw some butter in that shit and it might taste okay. But I feel like food probably used to taste like shit back then. Oh fuck, I'm in the wrong lane. Give me one moment.
The typical Ubaidian village generally consisted of several one-story single-family houses with a few large structures and facilities designed as storage bins for grain and other foodstuffs. Most Ubaid sites had a central earthen mound with a small building at its summit, which is believed to have been an early temple and the precursor to the ziggurat that would later on dominate the skylines of many Mesopotamian cities.
That's one of the most fascinating things about history to me, is that it's hard to think of any civilization that ever existed that did not have some kind of religion tied to it. When you are discussing human history, you almost always, if not always, have to take into account spirituality and religion into the picture, which is crazy to me. It's crazy to me how it's so common to believe in higher powers, really. It's not even like they all believe that something happens after you die. They all believe in gods. They all believe in either a god or multiple of them, which it makes sense because you see all of these natural disasters happening here. You see rain, you see clouds, you look up at the heavens and you think, okay, there's so much shit going on that is bigger than me. There has to be something. There has to be someone who's making this happen. There's no way this is happening all by itself. That's very interesting. And this is coming from a non-religious person. I'm agnostic. And so I just find it very fascinating. I find it incredibly fascinating. And before civilization even existed, when human beings were in tribes, probably the same thing was happening. I'm pretty sure that a lot of tribes before the Neolithic era did believe in animals being gods of some sort. I don't know. I'm not too sharp on that.
Like the Halaf, the Ubaid also traded their unique, hand-painted pottery, as well as other crafts such as figurines. Ubaid pottery is something that must have been prized all over the region, because it's been found at multiple sites throughout the Middle East, including Turkey, Iran, Syria, and across the southeastern regions of the Arabian Peninsula. much of
How did they get around that much to trade? Like, the horses were not being tamed yet, correct? Like, horses were not being tamed until a while later. Am I wrong? I mean, I guess there was also camels. Perhaps they rode on camels?
our understanding of Ubaid culture comes from the ruins of a city that later on would be famous in Sumerian mythology as the home of the god Enki. That city was Eridu. Even in antiquity, Eridu was believed to have been a very ancient, almost mythical place. For example, in the very beginning of the text known as the Sumerian King List, it's written, "After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Alalgar ruled for 36,000 years. Two kings, they ruled for a total of 6,800 years. Then Eridu
I think you mean 64,000, but
fell, and the kingship was taken to Bad Tabira." Another later Babylonian poem states, "A reed had not come forth, a tree had not been created, a house had not been made, a city had not been made. All the lands were sea. Then Eridu made."
damn. So this place is like kind of like Jerusalem of today. Like today, you would think about Jerusalem as that kind of place. It's a holy place and an ancient place. Funny how I've never heard about it. I feel like I've never heard of Eridu before.
In spite of both of these texts being more works of mythology than history, the later peoples of Mesopotamia may have been onto something. Archaeologists have determined that the site of Eridu may have been inhabited as far back as 8000 BC, over 10,000 years ago.
Holy shit.
During the Ubaid period, Eridu was a good place to settle down. It had plenty of land suitable for farming, as well as plenty of fish that could be attained from the nearby marshes close to the Gulf. In those days, the shores of what's today the Persian Gulf were much further inland than they are today. Such a place in those days may have seemed to have been a paradise in what was otherwise a dry, inhospitable desert. The local inhabitants may have even thought that it was the home of a god. That god would be Enki, the god of fresh waters, the sciences, technology, and the arts.
So they had sciences back then. What were sciences back then? What was science? Like, it can't be the science that we have today. Was it? What did they do for scientific development back then? Like, inventing the wheel? Would that be considered science? Definitely wouldn't be considered science to make a wheel today, but maybe it was back then. Shit like that.
Who was also known for his wisdom and had a soft spot for mankind. He would go on to become one of the most prominent deities in the Sumerian pantheon. During the Ubaid period,
Don't you think it's interesting how humans went from largely polytheistic to monotheistic? Back in the day, it seems every culture had gods, plural. And now every major religion has a god, one. Why is that? Why is that?
Eridu
I want to study that if nobody else has. I'm sure people have before. Like the reason for that change. There has to be a reason. It's completely puzzling. It's such a prominent shift. There has to be a reason for it in human psychology and culture development. And I wonder if my journey in learning history is going to teach me that.
It was still just a small village community.
Sorry.
During the Ubaid period, Eridu was still just a small village community with a rather humble shrine dedicated to Enki. Excavations at Eridu show that initially, Enki's sanctuary was little more than a small brick room, less than 8 square meters, with an altar at one end and a stand in the center for ritual offerings. In fact, ashes and fish bones have been discovered here, which may have been part of some ritual offerings to the god.
And that too, we don't make sacrifices anymore to gods or a god. Singular. That's not a thing anymore. I guess I can understand that because maybe it's secular development, like humanism in the Renaissance period. That might have been a reason why we stopped doing that, because we started valuing human lives just as much as we valued monotheistic lives.
Some archaeologists believed that every so often, the people of Eridu would take part in communal feasts that may have involved prayers to the god, along with singing and music. As the town grew, both the temple and the village expanded. By 4500 BC, the temple stood on a platform about a meter high. The expansion and height of the temple would continue to increase during the centuries until it turned into a step-like pyramid called a ziggurat.
And that too. Why a pyramid? Why is it always a pyramid, especially when it comes to spiritual worship? Why is it always a pyramid? Is it because it's such a reliable structure? It sits on such a strong foundation that you cannot topple it over? That could be it. And why don't we make pyramids anymore? Except for the Bass Pro Shops in Tennessee. I don't think anyone goes there to worship. Except for maybe Morgan Wallen.
Villages such as Eridu grew into prosperous towns. They attracted travelers and merchants. Some may have come to visit its temples and sanctuaries, like those dedicated to Enki, and make their own offerings to the god. Many of them brought items from their own.
They had stamps back then? They had fucking stamps? What did you need a stamp for back then? Maybe to as something in place of a signature? Or maybe if, say, you're making a shoe or something, you put a stamp on it to show that it's your shoe. Some shit like that. Kind of like a producer tag. Like Cash Money AP puts his, producer tag on the beats that he makes.
Own villages and towns that they donated to such temples or traded for local goods, such as barley, sheep, or some of Eridu's distinctive pottery. An interesting example of international trade in Eridu at the time had to do with copper. Copper is a very useful metal, but it's not native to southern Mesopotamia. It had to be imported into the region from places as far away as what's today modern Oman or Turkey.
How do you get that far, bro? Oh, by boat? And by... What is that person riding? A donkey? You ride a donkey?
It's quite remarkable that even during the Ubaid period, artisans were forging basic items out of copper in Eridu. Another item imported into the region, also likely from Turkey, was obsidian. Up until now, the early settlements that we've been taking a look at have all been quite small.
How do you find obsidian in the real world? I know how you find it in Minecraft, but where the fuck you find obsidian just lying around?
Perhaps a few hundred people on average, the exception being places like Eridu or Tel Zaydan in Syria. Both of these places during the Ubaid period may have had as many as 3,000 people at any given time.
That's crazy because that's the largest cities at that point, but a small town today is more than that. The town that we live in right now is probably 50,000 people.
Few would have thought, though, that perhaps only a millennium later, there would be a city in ancient Mesopotamia with a population in the tens of thousands. Less than 200 kilometers northwest of Eridu is the site of Uruk. It's here that most archaeologists and historians believe that the world's first true city came into being sometime during the 4th millennium BC.
So the 4th millennium, that would mean 3000s BC, right? Because you have the 0,000s, 1000s. Yeah. That would be the 4th millennium.
Though it's impossible to know for sure, archaeological surveys seem to indicate that by 3500 BC, Uruk may have had at least 25,000 residents.
Sorry for pausing so much. Imagine being an archaeologist and you dig up a whole city, bro. Like, you just keep digging and shit just keeps coming. That's gotta feel amazing. That has to be awesome.
This may not seem like much to us today. In most places, especially in the Western world, 25,000 residents is perhaps at best a medium-sized town. However, in the 4th millennium BC, this would have been a mega urban center, a place that those living in towns like Eridu a few generations earlier would not have been able to have even comprehended. Historians call this rapid growth of cities in southern Mesopotamia between the years 4000 to 3100 BC the Uruk phenomenon, or the Uruk period.
So, Egypt and shit, that wasn't really a thing yet? Like, the Egyptian ancient civilization wasn't a thing in the 4th millennium BC? I would have figured it would be, but I guess not.
It's also believed by many archaeologists and historians that sometime during this period, a people whose real origin is unknown may have entered into the region and mixed with the local Ubaid population.
Why don't we know where those people are from, if we know that they came? Who are these people? I feel like we should know that shit, bro. I want to know.
Adopting much of their culture and religion as their own. What the Ubaidians called them is anyone's guess. They, however, would call themselves Sagiga, meaning the black-headed people, and their homeland, Kiengia.
Wait, their homeland what?
Sagiga, meaning the black-headed people, and their homeland, Kiengia.
Kiengia? That sounds like Kenya a little bit.
In the past, villages were believed to have been ruled by a small council of elders presided over by a tribal chieftain. However, the rise of cities divided
I would not want to fuck with that dude, yo. That dude looks menacing.
Society into multiple classes that were ruled by religious, military, and political elites. Though the specifics of early government in Uruk aren't known, it's believed that the person at the top was a sort of priest-king who held both religious and secular authority. Below him on the social hierarchy were other priests, followed by a few elites or what we classify as noble families, and then specialized laborers, including artisans, craftsmen, fishermen, farmers, gardeners, and herdsmen, just to name a few. In later centuries, with the advent of writing, a scribal class would also develop. Below all of these were slaves.
I guess if you knew how to write back then, you were kind of him. You were like that guy. You're a genius if you know how to write.
Cities were also the place where certain objects were first produced in mass quantity. In the past, everyday items such as pottery and textiles were produced at home and generally for private use. However, during the Uruk period, specialized artisans and weavers mostly took over this task. The objects and clothing that they created may not have been decorated as ornately as in the past, but that wasn't the point. They simply had to be well made and useful. An example of this are the beveled rimmed bowls discovered in Uruk.
And before that, it was like people didn't have jobs before that, I figure. For the most part, there was one job. It was a farmer or a herder. And that's what you did. Like, because that's what you need is food. But then when you have a city like that, you can trade shit for food. So you can specialize in something. And that idea of specialty, specializing in making shoes or making pots or making other kinds of shit, that probably had a ginormous impact on the quality of everything, on the quality of products.
Fancy, they weren't, but they did the job.
Okay, they weren't fancy.
The day-to-day functioning of such an ancient, urban society required some type of authority to help organize tasks and distribute resources, as well as to keep order. In Uruk, as in other urban areas during this period, this was made possible by religion. Each city had a patron deity who technically, at least when they were on Earth, lived in the city, usually at a shrine or temple dedicated to it.
So back then, the deities were assumed to have been people at some point, or assumed to at least have lived on Earth. That's interesting. That's not something that we consider deities today to have done.
In Eridu, we saw that this deity was the god Enki. In Uruk, that honor went primarily to the goddess Inanna, although the god An also had a large temple there. In theory, the god of each city received goods from the people, which were a form of taxes, usually denominated in wheat, barley, pottery, textiles, or whatever useful items could be given. This was then redistributed to both the religious and political establishment, and then later to the general population. In most cases, this redistribution took place in the...
Damn. Some fucking liberals in Mesopotamia, yo. Redistributing the wealth. I'm sorry. I'm not making fun of liberals. I am, if anything, a liberal, although I'm reluctant to say so.
City's main temple complex, run by specially dedicated priests and priestesses who also conducted religious rituals. As cities
mainly because liberals are just so fucking annoying, and there just can be some of the most shrill, unbearable motherfuckers on the planet. So to consider myself one of them, it can be a bit difficult at times. But I do have beliefs that line up with theirs a lot of the time. So that is why I say I am reluctant to say that I am one.
Grew larger, the redistribution of goods and services became much more complicated. There were just so many different types of goods, as well as people with different professions that needed to be accounted for, and who depended on the temple's redistribution of resources for their survival. It was important for the temple bureaucrats to keep track of all of this activity, and so an early system of writing was developed specifically for this purpose. Dating to
It's so nuts that, like, there wasn't paper. You had to, like, get clay and mix it with water and then create a tablet to write anything at all. Like, that is probably so much work.
About 3300 BC and written on small clay tablets, the first forms of writing were pictographs that recorded the transfer of commodities such as grain, beer, and livestock. We call this very early script proto-cuneiform. With over 700 signs, it was quite complete, though it's highly likely that it was based off an earlier, more primitive system that has yet to be discovered, rather than developed all at once or by a single individual. This very early pictographic script was made up of pictures with relatively simple meanings. For instance, a head of a bull was used to represent cattle, while an ear of barley represented, you guessed it, barley.
Yeah, I guess if that's what writing was back then, it's probably not that hard to decipher it. I mean, it's literally just pictures.
Sometimes,
not that it isn't incredibly impressive to just develop a language from scratch. It still is. And just the idea that you literally developed, this civilization developed their entire written language. I mean, to do that in any form is insane.
So,
especially when you're just starting from scratch.
The meaning was not as clear and had to be read by association with another symbol. For example, the sign of a bowl could mean food or bread. Coupled with the sign of a human head, the two together meant to eat. Several centuries later, the form of the signs was adapted so that they could be written faster and with a reed stylus by making wedged impressions into a soft tablet of clay, which we today call cuneiform. The clay would then be laid out in the sun, where it would dry and harden, making the wedged impressions permanent. Cuneiform was ideal for writing the Sumerian language because almost all of the words in Sumerian are one syllable in length. This meant that it was possible to write down one symbol for nearly every spoken word.
That's really interesting. And it makes sense because they probably just had less words. Like, they probably didn't have much shit to say except food, eat, walk, farm, God.
It's due to the discovery and translation of such cuneiform documents that even after so many thousands of years, we're still able to peer into the lives of the people of ancient Mesopotamia. Though not a form of writing, other objects that were used for communication were cylinder seals. As their name implies, these are cylinders, usually made out of stone or clay, but sometimes also from metal, bone, or ivory, with the design carved into them so that when they're rolled across a slab of wet clay, a continuous impression is created.
That's fucking sick. That is so sick. Carving shit into a bone so you can roll it out onto a piece of clay later.
Such seals were used for sealing storeroom locks, goods in jars, or vases, boxes, and even baskets. The seals could also be used to confirm the identity of the sender or authorize important documents coming from someone in a position of power, such as a priest or high-ranking bureaucrat. The influence of the Uruk phenomenon wasn't limited to southern Mesopotamia, but spread throughout much of the ancient Near East between the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous remains of Uruk-style pottery and architecture at sites in Syria, Iran, and Turkey. It seems that much of this was not just taken from Uruk, but brought to these regions by trading colonies that were set up specifically for the purpose of acquiring raw materials such as copper, obsidian, lead, gold, silver, wood, and stone for buildings. Eventually, they would even import tin, which was needed for making bronze. It's unknown when exactly the first kings appeared in Mesopotamia, or how this position really functioned. Before this, power was in the hands of high-ranking priests, whose job, along with religious duties, included organizing the general population, collecting taxes, and distributing goods and services. They had the authority to do such things because they were believed to have directly represented the gods, or at least to have known their desires. However, no amount of divine intervention could provide physical security from one's foreign enemies.
How does one become a king in that scenario when there's like no kings already? Do they just show up and they're like, yeah, I talked to God, and he was like, yeah, you need to like grow that barley over there, and he like, you gotta like run that shit, and he fucking told me that shit, and people just believe him. People just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Being a pious priest or priestess didn't mean that such a person was a good warrior or a military strategist. As cities grew in size, so too did competition for scarce resources and farmland, and eventually, armed conflicts between city-states occurred. The need for strong, charismatic individuals who could lead men into battle was of utmost importance, and it's probably due to this that the first kings arose amongst the growing population.
Yeah, so it was probably like they know how to lead, and so they like accomplish some shit on the leadership side, and then they convince people that their ability to lead was obtained through divine right and divine intervention.
Mesopotamia. Though initially it may have been a temporary position needed only during war, eventually the position of king became hereditary. By 2900 BC, kings were commonplace in ancient Sumer, and scholars have used this date for the start of what they call the early dynastic period, which lasted nearly 600 years. The rulers of city-states generally had one of three titles: En, which roughly translates to Lord; Ensi, which was a governor or local king; and Lugal, which was generally given to more powerful rulers or great kings. For example, if If a king happened to rule over more than one city, then he could be addressed as a lugal, which literally means great man. A lugal could have several ensis ruling other cities on his behalf. Most cities were surrounded by high walls to protect the temple's administrative buildings.
Alright, I think I'm gonna cut it there because I've been running out of shit to say. And now we're just like watching somebody else's video. Go watch this dude's stuff. I'll link it in the description or something, because he did like way more work than I'm doing right now. I'm just reacting to his fucking video. So go watch that shit. And yeah, this is really interesting. I love learning about ancient civilizations like this. And I'm going to keep reading this textbook that I have. I didn't read it today because I'm in the car, but I have a textbook that goes over all of ancient culture and how it changed over time. Basically just world history and why the world is the way it is today and why it was the way it was back then, and how the reasons for why everything happened the way it did. Because I don't just like to understand what happened. I want to know why things happened. I don't know, it's just very interesting to me. It feels like, especially with content like this, like what this guy is making, it feels like I'm watching a movie, but it's shit that actually happened. It's really, really cool. So thank you for watching. Go watch this guy's stuff, and I will see you later. My name is Luke. This is Castles in the Air. I forgot to say that. Goodbye.